we know he's the real deal, but in terms of being ready in just his second season as a 19-year-old to cope with the pressure, that is remarkable. He got a bit of a pre-race pep talk and a hug from a fella you may have heard of called Lionel Messi. Back, definitely, it seems. They seem to be in contention again. Is it more competitive? Is it more skillful? That is, I think, where a lot of people are still struggling with it a little bit. I can't say this for sure, but it looks like he might have had a few of those drinks from the free bar.
Hello and welcome to this Bank Holiday Monday edition of Pit Lane Talk, your one-stop shop for all things F1 online. The Miami Grand Prix has been and gone. Kimi Antonelli has picked up another victory, extending his lead at the top of the Drivers' Championship to 20 points. And I'm delighted to say we have our man on the ground in Miami joining us today, Dan Moxon, the Express journalist. You are in Miami. Say hello, Dan.
Hello from Miami. It's actually turned out to be a lovely Miami morning, which it wasn't when we began. I opened my curtains this morning and the rain was not particularly fun to look at outside, but just in time for our recording, the sun has popped out and you've got a lovely backdrop of the lush Miami beach area.
All right for some, Dan. The weather's looking a lot better now than I think you had yesterday, though. But we'll come on to that shortly. But yeah, you're just on the edge of Miami Beach there, so that's how the other half live, I'm afraid, viewers. But just tell us a bit about the weekend before we get into the race itself. Just tell us a bit more about the weekend over there in Miami and how things have gone down. We've seen a few famous people, maybe.
Yeah, there's plenty of those knocking around. It's you know what? It's gone a lot smoother than it could have. There was a lot of worry about the storms that were coming in for race day on Sunday. Fortunately, as much as this part of the city was quite battered by them on Sunday, Miami Gardens, up where where Hard Rock Stadium and the racetrack is based, avoided much of the worst of it, and we got a race done with nothing more than a few droplets of rain that did cause much chaos, which, you know, that was the lack of rain was maybe a little bit of a detriment to the race, but the lack of thunder and lightning definitely helped us to go on. It wasn't looking so promising in the morning. I woke up, went on FaceTime to Abby to say hello, and I was showing her the weather. It was sort of a little bit of lightning in the sky. I opened my balcony door, and an actual bolt of lightning struck from what online said was only a couple of 100 meters away, and I kid you not, the noise was pretty intense, and I didn't need Abby to tell me, which she did, to very quickly close my balcony door, and I complied because I'm a good boy. So
and he didn't want to die.
Well, that too, you know, that self-preservation certainly played a part on that front, but yeah, so that was a pretty scary start to the morning, and I was sort of thinking then, looking out, I was like, well, if it's like this, there's no way we're having a Formula One race. But it all cleared off, and we did have a very nice Formula One race, I thought, in the end. So, yeah, the race there was a lot of fun elements to it. The event is amazing. There's so much going on around the track, around the stadium, so many activations, events, things for fans to do. I think it's a race where fans on the ground really get their money's worth, which is really nice to see. And the city itself, as I say, it's lush, it's beautiful to look at, it's enormous, the city of Miami. It's really tough to get around at times, particularly on a Grand Prix weekend. But I think this is a really great setting for a Formula One race.
What is the fan experience like there in Miami? Because, you know, with Formula One, it's a sport that's played out across a huge track. You know, we're talking a couple of miles long, and sometimes vantage views can differentiate, can't they, depending on what sort of course you're on. What's it like for a fan's perspective, and how much do the fans buy into it compared to, say, a European crowd?
Yeah, that last part's the interesting part, really, because it's like pretty much any other F1 race in that there's lots of screens around the track. Even if only the little part that you can see, you can still have a good sense of what's going on elsewhere. There's really good audio commentary that comes directly from the F1 TV broadcast. So there's lots of information about what's going on. But to your latter point about how the fans sort of embrace it, I do get a little bit of the sense, and I don't mean this as a blanket statement for everyone who attended, of course, but I do get a bit of a sense that a lot of people are coming to the F1 to be seen at the F1 rather than to see it. I was invited by MSC Cruises to experience a little bit of their hospitality this weekend, which was very kind of them. And what struck me when I was in there is even with loads of screens around the hospitality area and obviously outdoor areas where you can view the track, there were still a lot of people just sat around on their phones after they'd taken all their photos of them with F1 cars in the background. And quite a lot of people who didn't seem all that interested in the actual live action. So that is, if there's anywhere where this event can improve, it's maybe a little more passion for the actual racing. But again, I don't mean that as a blanket statement. There were a lot of people who were very much enjoying what was going on track. So yeah, it's an interesting one from that perspective for sure.
Obviously, there was a big change in terms of the actual start of the race. You ended up going 3 hours earlier than planned because of fears about the weather, which probably paid off in the end. But how hard was that from the organisers' perspective to sort of rearrange logistically? And you know, does that have an effect on? If you brought a football match forward 3 hours, you know, that'd be a bit of a problem. So is this the type of thing that they can adapt to quickly?
They adapted to it superbly. There's no criticism to be had on that front. It was left until quite late. It was on the Saturday sort of evening that they decided that they were going to bring it forward. And in the end, the storms actually held off, and we didn't get anything until after the original Grand Prix sort of time would have finished anyway. But obviously they weren't to know that. They did this because it was the best chance of completing a Grand Prix distance. But it was really well communicated. Everyone's encouraged to have the app if you're attending, because that's where you store your tickets, and they sent push notifications through that. Obviously, it was very widely reported by lots of different media sites, including ourselves. So the word got out very well, clearly, because when I arrived at the track on Sunday morning, the grandstands were still full. Everyone seemed to get there on time. The only sad part was that to rearrange everything a little earlier, we lost one of the support races, the Porsche Carrera Cup that was supposed to be taking place. So that's a little bit of a shame for that individual championship. But in terms of how the F1 race got on, it was really well organised. Nothing felt like too much of a rush at the track of everyone trying to pile in earlier in the morning than expected. Everything worked really well, I thought. I thought it was a really brilliantly done bit of sort of logistics, considering the really, really short time frame between the decision being made to bring the race forward and then the actual race starting itself.
Well, it was a third win in a row for Kimi Antonelli, and as we said at the top of the show, now 20 points clear of George Russell at the top of the championship. Probably not how we saw things playing out at the start of the season. We thought it might be a bit more of a reversal with Russell leading the way. So I guess the question you've got to ask is it time to start taking Antonelli serious as a title contender?
I think you have to. And I think George Russell will be... I don't think George Russell's a naive person, but I think he'd be very silly not to. And I think he will be, because you know what? He'll look at Japan and China, and he said this after the race on Sunday, actually. He said, you know, Japan and China, a couple of things didn't go his way. Bit of bad luck, and he thinks he could have had better results and maybe won those races if he hadn't had those things go wrong that were out of his control. This race, George was just off the pace. He was just not there. And he knew that. There's reasons for that. But afterwards, I think there was an admission of, yeah, you know what, Kimi's beaten me fair and square here on this weekend. And I think that's the first time that George has said that publicly. I don't know whether that's the first time he's admitted it himself after a race. But yeah, I mean, he's 20 points clear, nearly a full Grand Prix victory's worth of points. Very early in the season, of course. You know, we're still only 4 rounds into what is now a 22 race season rather than 24. But yeah, I mean, Kimi has been superb. He's only the third person ever to qualify his first 3 pole positions on pole, and the other 2 people to do that were Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher, which is not bad company to be in at all. He's also, his first 3 Grand Prix victories have also all come in a row, of course, these last 3 wins. The momentum is all with Kimi right now. And as I say, it's still very early in the season, but with every victory that goes by, if, you know, we go to Canada in a few weeks' time and he does it again, he's pulling further away from George, and there's 1 fewer race left in the season. So with every victory that goes by, it's becoming more and more likely that, you know what, Kimi Antonelli really is. We know he's the real deal, but in terms of being ready in just his 2nd season, as a 19-year-old to cope with the pressure, that is remarkable.
Yeah, all eyes are going to be on him now, aren't they? If the idea of him just playing the supporting cast to George Russell as well out the window now, I think. So we're going to learn a lot more about him and his personality, I think, as we go on in the forthcoming races. There was a couple of post-race penalties that were implemented, which have, one of them made a significant change in the form of Charles Leclerc. Can you just explain to us what happened there?
Yeah, that created a very exciting last lap of the race. Unfortunately, apart from if you're Charles or a Ferrari fan, he had a spin on the last side, and he said afterwards it was all his fault. He made a mistake as he was pushing to try and keep all. He was in the podium spots, fighting for third, and he just had a spin. His front left tire hit into the wall, and he was able to keep it going, but it very quickly became clear that there was damage to the car, so he was moving really, really slowly. And he was just doing his best to get it to the finish line, but because the car wasn't turning properly, he was cutting quite a lot of corners. He ended up being overtaken by Oscar Piastri, who got third place, Max Verstappen, and George Russell as well anyway. But then afterwards, the stewards were investigating him for all of those corner cutting, and as harsh as it sounds, they deemed that he was gaining an advantage from doing so, because obviously it's a much more quicker and direct way of getting to the end of the lap that he was trying to do. And they decided to give him a retrospective drive-through penalty, which equates to 20 seconds being added onto his time, because obviously the race was over, so he couldn't drive through. And that dropped him from 6th to 8th, sort of rubbed the salt into the wounds a little bit for Charles. He'd been leading the race earlier on. He was on for a podium by the time we got to the start of the last lap. So to finish the race 8th would have been particularly galling for him.
Verstappen obviously penalised as well. That didn't affect his placing, I don't think. But he had a spin right at the start as well, didn't he? But he managed to recover from that pretty quickly. So he's had a good moan about the cars recently, hasn't he? But it looked like he perhaps enjoyed this one a bit more.
Yeah, the Red Bull, I mean, everyone, apart from Aston Martin, brought upgrades to this race. But Red Bull brought a big raft of upgrades. And Isaac Hadjar had a tough weekend, but Max seemed to get more pace out of it. He qualified second. He was the only person that really gave Antonelli a bit of a go in qualifying. And we don't know how his race would have gone had he not spun on that first lap, because that knocked him back quite a lot of places. He did very, very well to recover it and to not hit anyone else, because obviously at the start of a race, there's every car's around you. He was surrounded on all sides. And somehow he didn't slam into anyone while spinning around, which was quite remarkable in itself. But yeah, he showed pretty good race pace at times, maybe made a bit of a strategy error going onto the hards early, which he gained quite a lot of ground for a while, but then faded a little bit. He ended up being voted driver of the day, which I thought was an interesting choice, but I think whenever you get a spectacular spin like that, the way that he saved it, I think that has played a significant part in that. But as you say, a 5-second penalty after the race, that was for crossing the white line on the pit exit a little bit earlier than you're allowed to do. But because of Charles' 20-second penalty, Charles was the person who finished behind Max. The 5-second penalty didn't affect his end result and the number of points that he's taken home anyway. Lewis
Hamilton has also sort of encouraged Ferrari to take a look at Mercedes and Red Bull's front wings. Do they feel that Red Bull might be starting to try and steal a march on Ferrari? Because we've sort of called out Ferrari as Mercedes' main contender in the first few races, but Red Bull in a bit of a resurgence.
Yeah, I mean, it's natural over time. Obviously, we've had a few months since Bahrain testing now. We've had a few months of each team has been looking at their rivals, looking at the way that they've designed things and going, that's a good idea. Let's copy is never the right word. They never like it when you say that they copy others, but they take inspiration from other car designs on the grid. So we get into that stage now where we've just had, that 5-week break where people have been able to work on their cars a lot. And I think the first of that inspiration is starting to come onto the cars. And as I said, Max looked a lot more pacey out of it. Whether or not that increases his enjoyment of these cars, we don't know. He insisted it wasn't just because his car was bad. But we'll see if he changes his tune in the next coming sort of weeks and months. If indeed that Red Bull is a lot more competitive as it looked in Miami, while admitting that is obviously a sample of one, we'll see where they're at in Montreal in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, you said that Max was sort of voted the driver of the day, but he would have had some competition from Franco Colapinto. I think he got a 7th place finish and was one of the stars of the weekend. So what did you make of his display?
Yeah, I mean, if I was voting and it was up to me, I think I would have given it to Franco, because we know he's had a tough time at Alpine. Pierre Gasly is the far more experienced Alpine driver. And And last year, when Franco came in, didn't score a point for the sort of 3/4 of a season that he was in that seat for. A lot of pressure on Franco coming into this season. But Franco he had Pierre's number all weekend. He was just consistently quicker throughout the whole weekend from practice to the sprint. Qualifying out-qualified him, Q3 appearance. And then in the race, his 7th place is his best Grand Prix result ever in Formula One. And I mean, it was the last track that he hadn't raced on because he replaced Jack Doohan after Miami last year. So it's not a case of it's a track that he's used to because we haven't hit those tracks yet. It's clearly a track that he enjoyed driving on, and that he was able to show his sort of full ability on. Latin American drivers and Hispanic drivers get a lot of love here. Obviously, there's a huge Latin population in Miami. Sergio Perez is someone who gets a lot of love, and he's back with Cadillac, so there was a lot of enjoyment for him. But a lot of Argentine flags in the stands, I noticed as well. You got a bit of a pre-race pep talk and a hug from a fella you may have heard of called Lionel Messi, who showed up and talked to. And obviously, Franco being Argentine, Leo will be, I don't want to say God to him, but he is pretty much the ultimate national hero in Argentina, isn't he? So, all these factors came together for what would have been a dream weekend for Franco Colapinto. And it's nice to see, and hopefully we'll get more of the same from him.
I can imagine the Argentina fans at F1 are not the ones messing on their phones instead of watching races and being there to be seen. They're there to make an atmosphere, aren't they?
They are, and they do. The ones that are on the ground, they really do make a great atmosphere. It's nice to see the amount of passion that they bring to it and the support that they have for Franco, for sure.
We said a few weeks ago we haven't really spoken a great deal about Lando Norris this season on these podcasts, which was a bit of a surprise when you think he is the defending world champion. But he may have missed out to Antonelli in the main Grand Prix, but he won the sprint. And McLaren are leaving Miami with more points than any other team. So a sign of progress for sure. So, after a bit of a rough start, are they back now, McLaren? Are they ready to challenge, do you think?
Yeah, as you say, a rough start for McLaren. When you've gone through the first 2 Grand Prix and only one car has started the first one and neither of your cars has started the second race, you must start sort of looking to the heavens a little bit and thinking, what have we done wrong here? They got a lot of bad luck in the early rounds, but then we saw glimpses of it at Suzuka. Oscar Piastri showed really good pace. And Lando was the one that did it here. I mean, let's not take anything away from Oscar because he was still second in the sprint race, third in the Grand Prix. He still had a pretty good weekend, but he just wasn't quite at Lando's pace. Lando was really, really strong. Pole for the sprint, won it pretty comfortably. Was very much in contention for pole for the Grand Prix. And then, he was the one pushing Kimi Antonelli all the way. So I didn't see much difference between McLaren and Mercedes in terms of, in particular, race pace. So much so that Mercedes couldn't catch up in the sprint. And again, Lando tried his very best to pile all the pressure that he could on Kimi Antonelli. But again, once he'd got past in that latter stages of the race, he just couldn't quite get close enough to the Mercedes. So, back, definitely, it seems. They seem to be in contention again. And that is not good news for Mercedes, of course. They would have much preferred to have their sort of monopoly on Formula One wins for as long as they possibly could. But certainly for us watching on, the more the merrier at the top. So McLaren seem to be capable of fighting there again. And as you say, it'd be nice if Ferrari could join that, maybe Red Bull with these upgrades. We'd love a midfield team maybe to start challenging the top teams. So, as I said, the more the merrier.
Now we're up like a few races into the season then, Dan. What's your view now on the changes that have been brought in? Do you think, obviously there's a lot more overtaken and the engines, some drivers have taken them to them, some have been less receptive. What's your own take on how the actual quality of the racing is playing out so far?
That's the difficult question. I think we have to separate quality from entertainment, because I don't think there's any denying that the overtakes that we're getting, whether they're artificial or not, as people label them, I don't think there's any denying that the race is more entertaining. Is it more competitive? Is it more skillful? That is, I think, where a lot of people are still struggling with it a little bit. There's a lot of still quite unnatural racing going on. The natural, ideally, you want Formula One cars to be foot to the floor as much as possible. And that's, even with these tweaks, still not really the case with this generation of cars. And the drivers won't like that because they want to go as fast as possible. The sort of motorsport purists certainly won't like that. But I think to the general fan, the casual, whatever you want to call them, I think we do have an improved product on track this season.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, to be honest with you. I just think, you know, even from a purist perspective, you may have a car and a driver that are, you know, significantly better than the rest of the field. And if they just pull away with it too much, it doesn't make it a great spectacle. So although there are question marks, isn't there, around, you know, these overtakes, are they considered artificial and whatnot? And I understand the thinking behind that, but is it more entertaining? I would have to say at the moment, I think it is. So that is going to pull more people in to watch races, I think, and where that takes us, we'll see. But good weekend, you know, for Mercedes, McLaren, and to a certain extent Ferrari. At the other end of the spectrum, though, not so good for Aston Martin again, and they were the only team not to bring any upgrades to Miami as well after you know, a few weeks off. So why is that?
Yeah, that was a strange one. I think we were expecting every team to come with something, and then Aston Martin turned up and they're the only team that don't have upgrades. And Adrian Newey's explanation for that was that they're going to do a proper upgrade. What that actually means is very much up in the air. I'm surprised that, as we say, we had, you know, 5 weeks between the last Grand Prix in Japan and this one here in Miami. So it's hard to imagine that they couldn't cobble together something that was going to improve the car. That said, we've seen it from Williams before, because they're obviously quite overweight cars, but they've been saying that they can't just throw bits at it as and when, because obviously we've got budget caps and they need to sort of optimize how much they're spending and when they're going to bring these upgrades. So maybe there's an element of that at play. But I'll be very surprised if we don't see something in Montreal, because again, it was a desperate weekend for Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll don't want to be fighting, with all due respect to Cadillac. They're the new team. They shouldn't be competing with Cadillac. Cadillac shouldn't be able to compete with anyone at this stage, and it's as great of a job that Cadillac have done to get here and to get on the grid. It's purely through Aston Martin's own regression and problems that Cadillac has someone to fight against. So it's great for Cadillac, but the fact that Aston Martin are down there is, I think we've called it embarrassing before, and it really is. And for as long as they're there, that's what it's going to continue to be.
Is there any word from the drivers on the poor performance themselves? I mean, you know, Fernando Alonso is a former world champion. He doesn't want to be scrapping around at the bottom of the grid at his age, does he? But I guess there's not a lot he can do, really.
Well, this is it. There's an element of that, and they're also very well trained, obviously, in front of the media, to maybe hide their true feelings to an extent. The interesting thing that we have had from Fernando is, obviously, he turns 45 in July. This is the last season of his current Aston Martin contract. But he's already started laying the seeds almost a little bit to say, you know what, I don't want to go out like this. As it stands, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling strong, I'm feeling fit. And we're getting some hints that Fernando is leaning towards staying on for at least another year. Which we love having Fernando around, so that's always nice. But yeah, he wants to go out on a career high, which is obviously completely understandable. I don't know if that means he's going to wait around until they've got a title shot, because that might be quite some time yet. But he's certainly not going to want to end his Formula One career on this note, where they're going to struggle to even score a point this season at this rate.
Yeah, I'm a big Alonso fan, so I would certainly like to see him again, whether it's with Aston Martin or whoever, still racing next year, and hopefully things can look up for him in the next few weeks, especially if Aston Martin can do, as they say, a proper upgrade on the car, and we can see if they can start actually bothering people at the other end of the grid. Okay, well, that's the Miami Grand Prix on the track stuff, Dan, but you know, great that you were there. You had your media pass as usual. But unlike some of the other races that you go to, where you're normally just there in a press capacity, you've been up to a couple of other things as well, haven't you, Dan? So tell us all about that.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I got invited down to the hospitality by MSC, who've gone quite big on this race. It's a cruising company. Not everyone might be aware of who they are, but they've gone big on their F1 sponsorship, and they're trying to come into the US market in particular. Miami, if you don't know, is a massive cruising hub. It's fairly close to the Caribbean, so it's an ideal place for a lot of people to set sail from. But yeah, they invited me. They've built a new hospitality for this season, which is shaped like a boat. You may have seen it on the broadcasts. I know that the Sky and the F1 broadcasts gave it a bit of a showing on there as well. But it was nice to sort of, as you said earlier, see how the other half lives a little bit. It's hospitality at a Formula One race is not necessarily something I could afford myself, so it was nice to get the experience of that. And to see the weekend from a bit of a different perspective, because as media, we're all there with jobs to do, and we're there, yes, to watch Formula One, but we've got our analytical brains on and this sort of thing, and we're looking for what's the best story going to be, what's the best quotes going to be after the race. So it was nice almost to maybe not put my feet up, because I'd like to think I was still working hard, but to be able to see the experience from someone coming in, having that sort of package, being able to see the race from on track as well, from a different perspective rather than just from the media centre. So it was nice to have that opportunity to do that. Thank you to MSC Cruises for doing that for us. But yeah, no, that was a lot of fun to be able to do that. And if you are able to afford such a package, which I appreciate, is they can be quite expensive at Formula One weekends, but I would certainly recommend giving it a go. The open bar is also not a bad feature, I will add at the end of that.
You've pricked my attention, Dan.
Yeah, I buried the lead there a little bit, didn't I?
You did a little bit, yeah. Did you actually go on a cruise ship, or were you just in the hospitality section with them?
I actually did before the race weekend. I went down to Miami Port and they invited me on a tour of one of their ships. I didn't obviously go out to sail. I had a job to do at the track at the weekend. But yeah. I did get a tour of one of their actual real ships as well. And that's what they've tried to do with the hospitality. They've tried to sort of recreate their sort of on-ship experience. Because obviously they're trying to encourage people to go on their cruises and make money out of it. That's why they're doing this. So... But yeah, no, it was a fun experience looking at a cruise ship. I've not actually sailed on a cruise before, so that was a nice new experience for me. And as I say, then to experience the hospitality, which is something that also we don't often get the chance to do, so that was quite nice.
Martin Brundle's grid walks are always a highlight of the F1 Grand Prix weekends, and he didn't disappoint this weekend, did he? He had another bizarre interaction with I think with Jimmy Fallon, was it? There's something a bit mad going down. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, well, being at the track, I wasn't watching the Sky feed, but being in contact with colleagues back home, the group chat blew up a little bit on Martin's grid walk, which you always know that something fun's happened. So I rewatched it later on, and yeah, so Jimmy Fallon was there, one of the many celebrities on the grid, as you alluded to earlier, and he had an interesting thing in the interview in that he just, the blue and white Sky Sports covers that they have on the microphones. He decided to bite that off for some reason in the middle of that interview, which I was watching him afterwards as well. And even on the grid, there's sort of alarms on the grid that go off when people need to clear off after the national anthem, and then like a 5-minute warning one and stuff. And there was 10 minutes before the race, and one of those alarms had gone off, and the celebrities are supposed to leave. And everyone who doesn't need to be on the grid basically needs to leave the grid as soon as the national anthem's over. And we had the national anthem. It was all very American and patriotic. Land of the free, home of the brave. A stealth bomber going over the track, which was pretty surreal to see in person. And then, yeah, most of the people that need to clear off the grid do so. And then you've got Jimmy Fallon there in front of the DJ, busting some shapes still. I can't say this for sure, but it looks like he might have had a few of those drinks from the free bar.
You've stolen my next joke.
Maybe contributed to that. And then it was quite fun to see Stefano Domenicali, the F1 CEO, and Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the head of the FIA, being the two people to come over to him and almost shepherd him away. Which you've got the two top people in Formula One doing that. And yeah, I think Jimmy Fallon had a very fun weekend in Miami. How much of it he remembers could be an entirely different question.
Well, if he needs reminding of what he got up to, he could always tune into Pit Lane Talk, couldn't he? And we'll be happy to give him a rundown. But well Indeed. Done, Jimmy. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of today's show, Dan. When are you flying back to the UK?
Yeah, so I'll be heading to the airport this afternoon for my overnight flight back. I can't sleep on planes. I've always struggled to do so. So I'm going to be landing on Tuesday in the UK, having not slept since getting up this morning, going back to pick up a 2-year-old from nursery. So So I am going to be a very, very tired man by Tuesday evening, but that's all right. That's part of the gig. But yeah, so I would say I'm looking forward to coming home, and I am. I very much miss my fiance and very much miss my daughter. I will also very much miss that view, is the other thing that I would add.
It looks pretty good. When you were explaining, you know, your long flight back, just for a couple of seconds, I started to feel sorry for you, Dan. But then I remembered you'd been on hospitality with a cruise ship company and at the Miami Grand Prix, so I'm afraid sympathy is in short supply. But
no, that's entirely fair enough. Entirely fair enough.
Well, I'm glad you've had a good weekend and enjoyed a good race there. Do have a safe flight at home, Dan. Thanks very much for joining us today for this transatlantic edition of Pit Lane Talk. Many thanks to our viewers for tuning in, as always. I've been your host, Richard Garnett. We will be back next Monday with more fallout from the Miami Grand Prix and to preview the next Formula One race, which is going to be in Canada. So many thanks to Dan, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.